No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, we're going to be talking about part 3 of our 4-part series going over Ron Carucci's book, To Be Honest, Lead with the Power of Truth, Justice, and Purpose. If you haven't listened to my interview with Ron from about 2.5 weeks ago now, please do so. You'll really enjoy it. We still have a lot of good feedback, a lot of listens, and a lot of streams going on that interview, maybe more so 2.5 weeks out than any interview we've done, which speaks a lot to the work that Ron is doing in this space. In the first segment, we talked about a company's ability to have a clear identity. Basically, are they who they say they are? Last week, we spoke about accountability. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about governance, which is the process by which organizations make and communicate decisions. I mean, just as simple as that. So the first question I have to ask you is, have you ever been asked by an organization to communicate a decision or to make a decision, and you felt like maybe it wasn't your decision to make, or that the decision had already been made for you, but you were just kind of expected to play along?
Yeah, I think life in general has that happen. Sometimes you're voluntold, right?
Voluntold, exactly.
Yeah. No, absolutely, it happens quite often. I mean, like, at the end of the day, decisions do have to be made, and I can respect that and understand that. And I think that sometimes, as a leader, we have to make decisions without all of the information, or in the moment. I feel strongly that those really 2 things from a leadership standpoint, courage and decisiveness are 2 major factors. And so within decisiveness is that ability to make a decision that you have to do sometimes. But I think that, what you and Ron spoke about is that, how do you make decisions, and then how do you share the ways in which you make them, and why you made them the way that you made them? Mm-hmm. I think that is so important. And I think that that's probably one of the things that I see a lot of rubs between kind of leaders of people and their people sometimes, is that there's a decision that has to be made, or there's a decision that's been made for us as leaders. And then we are either having to communicate the decision out, and or we're having to make a decision with more information, and sometimes information that we can't currently share in the moment. And that can be really difficult. I think we've spoken about this before, but just telling people sometimes that you know more, but you're unable to share it at this point, and leveraging and leaning into some of the relationships that you have and some of the trust that you've built with the team is important. But I think that the governance piece and just the transparency piece is so critical to building great cultures.
I think where a lot of leaders step on landmines here is in that they have people who want to be involved in the decision-making process, because we all know that when people are involved in whatever the strategy is and creating the strategy, their execution or their buy-in on the execution is going to be a lot stronger. Whereas if a strategy is just communicated to them or dictated to them, the buy-in, it might not be as strong as if they kind of owned the creation itself. Now, that's not always realistic. It's not always realistic to have your people design and implement every single strategy. As a leader of people, sometimes that's your job. In fact, a lot of times it's your job. And so when it is your job to do that, how you communicate that to your people in a way that makes them understand that just because they weren't involved in the creation of this strategy, it doesn't mean that their opinion isn't valued. It doesn't mean that they're not needed in order to execute this correctly. It doesn't mean that you don't trust them. There are other things at play, and being transparent about what those things are in terms of how you made the decision, or what the key factors were. That's incredibly important if you want to make sure that your people understand you, and they don't lose trust or faith in you as the leader, or think that you're trying to hide something from them.
It's an interesting thing, because a lot of times the perspective that you have, the experience that you have, the background that you have, really is what I believe kind of creates intuition as a leader. And a lot of times you're pulling from your intuition or your experience or background to make decisions that can seem very trivial and small, but to the person and to your people in the moment, those that are that are impacted by the decision, or that are having to kind of move forward with a decision, not understanding, not really like having a chance to take the time to help connect the dots, not having the dialogue or the conversation around the decisions, I think are it's just it's so important. Like I think of the amount of times that even before I was a leader, where you'd be in meetings and you'd be listening to leaders talk, the difference between a leader who says something like, well, like, like that's just what it is. And, I mean, sometimes like, we have to run a profitable business, or we have to do, like, they don't, like, the answers are kind of the whole like default, like, you really can't talk through it. You can't talk about it. You can't ask questions about it, versus a leader who goes up there and says like, so like, let's talk about why this is something that we have to do organizationally. Like, let's talk about not only the impact that I know that it has to each one of you and how this may impact your job, or how this may impact how you do your job. But let's talk about that and let's understand it. What are the hurdles that we see here? Like, some of these decisions that have to be made are made for really, big reasons. And sometimes we don't have all the information to these reasons. But the decision is made this way. So like, let's not spend the time necessarily trying to understand a decision that none of us were in the room for. Let's spend the time talking about the decision this impact has on what we're currently doing, and what are things that we can do to make sure that we're aligned with whatever decision was made. But at the same time, that we can consider, we have space to talk about it, debate it, maybe have a little bit of dialogue, so that people understand that it's not being, it's not one of those things where like it only feels like it's being done just to them, but it's actually being kind of done to all of us, and then collectively as a team, we have to talk through it.
Right. I mean, you have to have empathy as the leader, to not make it seem like you are unimpacted by something when they might be. I love the example that you gave when it comes to leaders kind of doing this incorrectly, because I think, one of the things that's important to me when I'm being asked to do something is the why. I've always been big on knowing why. I need to be able to connect those dots to the mission of the organization. I want to know why I'm being asked to do something. And I don't think I'm a dumb guy. I think I can figure out the why on my own most of the time, but sometimes I can't. Sometimes I need to have somebody explain to me the why, because it just doesn't make sense. Now, I have a strong level of assuming positive intent. So if the person telling me to do something or asking me to do something has a strong track record with me and there's a good relationship there, then I'm okay with not knowing that why at the beginning. I'm okay with going forward and trusting and saying, all right, it's time to execute, but I just want to let you know, at some point, I'm going to need to know a why here. And give them time, because maybe they're figuring it out. And the example you gave when it comes to leaders who do this incorrectly, why this is so important is because if a leader doesn't need to go through that process with their people because they've already gone through it on their own, either because the job they have is not a job, it's a career, and so they're bought into it by virtue of the fact that, hey, you know what, this is my career, I'm not going anywhere, so I better kind of get on board, even if it might take me a while to get there. Or maybe they were presented the information from their boss a week earlier, and they had a week to pour through it, and they had a week to ask questions and to have the why explained to them. To expect that level of buy-in and commitment from their people in the same meeting that is presented to those people is obviously that's a farce. There's no way people can get on board with something that quickly. And so to explain it in a way that kind of leapfrogs over that process of kind of understanding and acceptance, I think doesn't do your people the justice it deserves in order to kind of get them coming along from the process. I think one of the things that Ron talks about when it comes to this process that is just critical is we have to talk about, who gets to make these decisions, like what authority do they have to make them, and what resources do they have. And so like when you're in a meeting with people, and this could be a meeting with your peers or your direct reports or your boss or your boss's boss, it doesn't matter. If you're in a room with people and you're having a meeting, you are there to make decisions. Somebody is there to make a decision, otherwise there wouldn't be a meeting. And so in a lot of these meetings, it's not even clearly defined what decisions everybody's there to make. It's kind of everybody's there to. What are you doing? Is it show and tell? Are you presenting your piece of the puzzle and then you move on? Like, what's the reason for being there? Besides group accountability, I guess. If you're not involved in the decision making process, then why are you there? It should be streamlined to the people who are involved in that decision making process, and you'll get a lot less fluff in the room and a lot more productivity around getting to the right answers.
Yeah, and I think it's important to clarify to your point, like who was in the room to make the decisions, but then also how are they representing, those in which they either lead or that they're kind of advocates for.
So true.
I think it's important to understand that. And I think that the whole point of the governance piece in an organization is that not only is it important to have the right decision makers in the room, but it's also important to clarify how they actually make the decisions, or how they go about getting the information to make the decisions. Because I think that in a lot of industries, in a lot of places, it's built in such a way that there's only a handful of people that are in the ideation phase of it. There's only a handful of people that are thinking or bringing their experience or their perspective into the room to make a decision. And we don't shake up that handful of people, nor do we hold that handful of people truly accountable to making sure that they are staying in touch with or looking for, kind of diverse opinions and thoughts and ideas against the strategy that's happening with the organization. I think there's this assumption that if there's people in the room that represent different parts of a business, or that maybe advocating for different groups of the teams across the organization, that by default they're going to come with some type of a small opposition, or they're going to come with a different perspective that will challenge the idea to make it better. But that's not always the case, because I can only think of a few times in my career where not only have I had a leader above me that talked a lot about decision making, but that there were layers of leadership above that person where they would talk about the responsibility of decision making and how they would make sure that the person in the room was representing the ideals of those that they led, across the organization. But it's such a rarity. I often wonder, who was in the room for that decision, because it feels like a decision is so far off base. It feels like, how did we get there? That it makes you question everyone involved, because it just doesn't feel like it makes sense. It doesn't feel like it's aligned with maybe an organizational objective, along with maybe the result of the thing that we're looking to increase or improve over time. And so it can be really difficult to then, as you said at the beginning of the show, to as a leader then go and have to communicate or implement these types of decisions when, as a leader yourself, you're questioning even how did it even get to that point.
Right, for sure. So I mean that goes back to the, you're bought in by virtue of the fact that, well, this is your career and you kind of have to get on board, and you're okay with executing at a high level and working through the why in the background. And maybe you'll be in future meetings where you can ask those questions and you can get more insight to that. But the average person who, they're not working their career, they're working a job. They're working a retail job while they're going to school, or this is a stepping stone to something else. Good luck getting them to execute on a high level if they are not crystal clear on the why. And so if you, as a leader with access to more information, are walking away from having this decision presented to you thinking, where did they come up with this? There's no way that your people are going to be walking out of the meeting that you give to them with any more clarity than that. They'll have the same questions. They'll have the same kind of wondering of where do we come up with that thing. The other part of this too that I think is important is when you talk about who's in the room to make a decision. Ultimately, most decisions are made by a person. Most decisions are not a consensus or a democratic vote in an organization. There's a person who has to make a decision, and the other people in the room are helping to inform that decision. They're giving pieces of information, and then ultimately it comes down to a person whose job it is to make that decision. It's really important that people in the room understand what their role is. Is my role there to give information to somebody who then has to make a decision, or is my role part of the actual decision-making process? Do I get to make this decision? Is it a consensus? In a lot of these meetings, the desire to make people feel involved is presented in a way that makes them believe they actually have part of the decision-making process, when that's not the case. And I think that it honors your people more if you come right out and say it. Hey, just so you know, this is I have to make this decision. If I'm a leader and I say to my people, hey, this is a really tough decision and I have to make it. I've been charged with making this decision, and it's not one that I take lightly. It's one I take seriously. So I'm trying to talk to as many people as I can to get information that will inform my decision better, because ultimately it's my decision that I have to make. I would love to get your opinion on this. But to present it in such a way that says we have to make this decision. Well, no, we don't have to make a decision. I have to make a decision, and you're going to help me get there the best way that you can. I think we patronize our people when we present it in a way that says they're part of the actual decision-making process, when in reality they're just part of the informing process. And I think we lose credibility over it over time.
Yeah, I think it's one of the unique things that like entrepreneurs, small business owners, from a leadership perspective, that really they get it right. And I think that's why you tend to see sometimes a great deal of loyalty and kind of like the family feeling. Is when you have work environments and things like that where that person is the decision maker and they say that out loud and they're like, yeah, I want your opinion, but don't get it twisted. Like, I have to make this decision in this call, and I want to understand and I want to take information and I want to do I need to do what I believe is the right thing that's going to be best both for the company and for for the people that work here. I just the other day, I swung by a friend of mine's. They opened up their small business. They were living here in my neighborhood and kind of had a food industry business out of their home, and they have their own spot now. And I swung by and bought some stuff and hung out with them for about 30-40 minutes, and they're looking at hiring like employee number 3. It's a couple. And they're gonna this is their first ever employee that they're going to they want to hire into their small business. And we were talking about how important this is, and like it's what I appreciated about him, because he goes, he's like we're talking about number 3, like the number 3, like the first person ever that does not live in our household that will work for our organization. And we had a really good conversation about that, about how do you filter, what are the things that you're going to do, and how do you select that talent, and then, but not only how do you pick a person, but how do you pick a person with the future in mind of like where you want this to go and what are you working towards, and how do you assess for some of those things now, and how do you position that job, as such. But as we were talking about this, it really made me think of them, because like that's the decision, and they're going to be super duper clear on exactly what they're looking for, who they want to bring on, why they want to bring them on, and all the things that they want to make sure represent all of their blood, sweat, and tears they put into this small business. But that's what I think is a unique thing when we think of entrepreneurs and small business owners, that it's really clear. I think as companies get larger, as businesses get bigger, then you start to have this idea of a larger leadership team or a board of directors, and like now you have all these spaces, C-level executives, where there is that kind of muddy waters of who's actually making the decision. Is it all of us? Is it one of us? Is it a vote? Is it opinion based? And I think that can. I think the way that comes, across the organization sometimes is like that lack of clarity. As it gets more and more cloudy, it can cause a lot of ripples in the culture around the true governance and trust and transparency of the organization.
I completely agree. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1-minute hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
The 1-minute hack.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic 1-minute hack. I think of the 3 that we've discussed so far over these last 3 weeks, this one has the kind of the potential for the culture of an organization or a team to be eaten away from the inside out without leaders really being aware of what's happening until it's too late. And so I think this is really important to take steps to do this up front and to make sure this is something that is practiced within your team and within your organization, because it's something that has to be proactive and not reactive.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.